Hello everyone, so today I'm just going to do a quick review of the Saga 2nd edition main rulebook. Now this video is not going to go over in depth every rule change side by side with the original book, but I am going to go over the production quality of the book, give you a look at it, talk about my initial thoughts, and just give a little bit of broad overview of where I think rules have changed significantly as compared to the original book. I will show the original book side by side with it at points just to show some of the differences and just give my overall thoughts on it. So right off the bat, what I would say is that this book is probably somewhere around half the price of the original Saga rulebook. The original Saga rulebook was set specifically for the Dark Ages, and it contained battle boards, rules on factions, and other things that this book does not have. This book is about 50 pages, where the other book is about 75 pages, and this rule book definitely has a different sort of production quality to it. So I'll start with that. I'm really happy with the way this is. This is a soft cover, like the original, but it's got a really nice matte sort of hard cover. It's a soft cover, but it has a nice firm cardstock, whereas the original one is definitely like a glossy. You know, both of them are actually nice in that regard, but one of the things that's significantly different between the production quality on this one and this one is the actual paper itself and the printing. So just to kind of give you an impression here, this one is definitely like a matte finish. It's not really very glossy, and it has a bit of a thick paper, which is quite nice. I don't know the various grades of paper, but one of the things that I always kind of marveled at with this one was that I always found that it was a little glossier and that it actually felt a little bit more like magazine paper, if you can see that, where this one here, when I kind of manipulate the paper itself, it's not to the same extent. It's a bit of a heavier weighted, more of a matte finish paper, which I actually quite like. It has definitely a different feel to it than the other one. The other one just feels, it always felt a little bit more magazine-like than this kind of book. And so that, I think, is a step up. And I don't know, I mean, in all fairness, I've used this one quite a bit. So I don't know what this one will look like, but even in just looking at this, just through normal use, if you can see this here, there's like one page that was sort of sticking out of the top, and it's just gotten sort of worn and wrinkled on the top, kind of like a magazine would, if you can look at that there. I don't really think that's going to happen with this one, with the way it's designed. The cover itself is designed differently. And yeah, I don't see it wearing exactly the same, and so from that perspective, it is nice. And again, although the universe books that have been released so far, like this, are actually in hardback, and that's an improvement. But just comparing these two, I still think that this is actually a step up from what was offered before. So, when looking at the rules, I did notice overall that there were, well, I guess I should say, this actually seems like an improvement in the layout compared to the original. The original was nice, but I found that both of them do use, I guess, photography and various images as aids throughout the book that breaks up the text. But I found in this book you'll see more full photograph of miniatures at times, which I really do like. But it's just fairly streamlined, like you'll have everything on one page, and although like you will see here like an image kind of like similar to the last book, you just see much more continuous blocks of text, I find, than the other one. I do think that they use less images of simulated gameplay. Like I noticed in looking through the original book that there were a lot more diagrams than in the new rulebook. That could be considered a negative. They do have diagrams and they do still utilize it, but when looking at it overall, I noticed there are definitely there's less real estate given to diagrams as compared to the original. There are significant rule changes throughout the book. I think that, in my opinion, at first glance, I would just say that Saga dice have changed significantly, so a lot of time was spent on that and explaining those differences and just how that's going to work. It does seem a little more structured in its use of the phases. They had them in the first book too, in the original edition of the rules, but it seems a little bit more structured this time in the way it's presented. As well, they do, like, even in some cases, have sections dedicated that didn't even exist before. Like the one that comes to mind is charging. And so, really, in many cases, the rules are not totally different than the play style from before, but they actually refer to charging and have a section on charging where it wasn't really referred to as its own distinct thing, as far as I can see in the original book. Everywhere throughout the book has little things that have changed, so I do think it really justifies like a second edition. You are getting like quite a bit of difference from the first edition. And so from that perspective, I actually think that it's good from what I've seen so far. I'm actually looking forward to it. I'm not disappointed in it. As well, there's a whole section on equipment that didn't exist in the first book. And there's even a section on special rules, which did exist in the first book, but they've made changes and they've consolidated them into this book. They've almost taken things that you found within unit profiles and character profiles that were sort of common across various types of heroes and things you would see over and over that were done in the first edition. They've kind of consolidated into, let's say, a special type of rule, like heroic unit in this case in the special rules. And also equipment, you often saw these kinds of rules within types of units and characters in the first edition, so it's not as if everything is completely new, but they've sort of put it into the main rulebook, which is meant to be a launching point for all of the various universes that are to come out in Saga, Dark Ages being the one that's currently released. All of the universes are to refer to this, and so they'll talk about bows and slings and composite bows and crossbows in a general sense as to how they're supposed to work now, instead of just relying on a period book in the future, to sort of describe that rule in detail. And I think that that's actually an improvement to have a bit more standardization in that regard from the very beginning. And so I thought that that was good. I've already mentioned it, but I do really there's a lot of beautiful photography, and I know it takes up some real estate in the book, but I do think it's really nice for those of you that like to have a nice looking rule book and enjoyable book to have to look through. They do have the Assembly of the Warband section at the end of the book, like originally in the first one, and there have been, like I said, changes pretty much everywhere. They do touch on mercenaries and legendary units, and really kind of refer you to the various universes that will be going out, but just mentioning how they are going to work for those universes. One of the things that I think I was a little disappointed in, and others were as well, is that the original book had a number of scenarios that you could play for the Dark Ages, whereas this book only has one scenario. Granted, it does have some different deployment options and some special rules which didn't exist in the original book, whereas you could literally have, if you and your opponent agree, to have special random table that you use to change the game slightly, in addition to 3 different deployment options. But they have a fairly standard facing each other off, 2 warlords against each other sort of scenario, which I think will be a good scenario, and I like the way it was presented, but it is a step backwards from having like the number of scenarios that we had before. They do refer to an expansion that's supposed to be coming out that will be both a campaign as well as have a number of scenarios in it called the Book of Battles. Because this book is really so well produced, I'm happy to really buy that Book of Battles and I never did initially get the Age of the Wolf campaign before, so I am sort of interested in that book, but many people will see that as a step backwards. I think it all has to be really looked at with a grain of salt, just in the sense that this one is a nice quality book, and it is so much less money than the other one was. However, you are sort of being pulled into buying a universe book and now this book of battles. Really, at the end of the day, everyone's going to be their own judge as to whether that's acceptable to them. I do harken back and like the days when we used to get rule books like the original Saga book, where you had everything you pretty much needed, initially at least when it was first released, in this book. Of course, for those that play Saga, they know quite well that even if you just play Dark Ages, a number of supplements came out later with rule expansions and things you had to buy. And so you'd be almost kind of fooling yourself in this case to think that this is all you ever needed. It was released initially that way and was a really nice packaged product, in my opinion. But they're moving to this model now in order to get everybody on the same page, literally, this book, to then, no matter what kind of setting you want to play in, you can always use this as your core set of rules, and they can spend time on the settings of your choice that you decide to buy, rather than having to buy all the settings to keep up with the rules, which is the way the old system worked. So hopefully they do produce. I will be reviewing the Viking Age universe that is meant to work with this book for Dark Ages. But I'm hoping that both that book, because I've not thoroughly looked through it yet, and also the Book of Battles will be a really good product like this is, and just expand upon it. And so they do have, a reference sheet at the end, and so a lot of that is similar to the first one. But, overall, I found looking through this to be a little easier than looking through the first one. Now, part of that is I have the benefit of knowing the rules from the first edition, and so that makes it easier. But I do feel that the font, the type of paper used, and the organization of the book is better than the original. And so from that perspective, I do think it's a great thing. I am really looking forward to going through the Viking Age book and seeing how that played out. The original Saga rulebook had a number of battle boards to deal with the factions from this book, which were a few factions, but not nearly all of the factions in originally released for the Dark Ages. Like, you're looking at almost 4 times that, around roughly. And so the fact that and I don't want to get into a review of the Dark Ages book, but it's almost hard to compare these products because this one doesn't give you any of them, yet this one only gives you about 1/4 of all of the Dark Ages battle boards that you would then be getting in the Dark Ages expansion in 2nd edition, because they give you all the battle boards. They don't make you buy a few references. So it's really difficult to directly compare these two. You can, obviously, but it's really going to be hard. It's really going to depend on what you value. And at the end of the day, I feel the money for this book in particular was well spent. I think the product was really good. I think they did a better job at the presentation and with the materials. There were some things definitely lacking, but that's just because of the organization of the rules are different going forward. Overall, I'd have to say I'm happy with this. I'm not disappointed at all, really. I'm just hoping that actually everything else that's released is of kind of the same quality, and then I feel I'll be good to go to continue my journeys into Saga and the Dark Ages. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this little quick look at the new book as compared to the old one, and talk to you later.